Good morning and welcome to the support session for GCSE Music, A-Level Music and A-Level Music Technology. An update really on where we are at the moment with summer 2021. So we're still really at a point where there's lots of things that aren't known, and I'll be running through some of that as we go through the session as well. But really, it's to go through where we're currently at, have a look at what's still to be confirmed, and then also to go through what you can potentially be getting on with your students at the moment as well. Before we really get going, just to let you know, the session is being recorded, and I'll make a recording and the slides available on the Pearson Music community page in the next few days as well. There is a link to that at the end of the slides as well. To really just make sure everyone can hear me as well, there should be a raise hand icon in your icon bar. So if you can click on that now, before we really get going with all the information, just so I know that you can hear. I'll just put a message in the chat as well. So if you do have any problems with sound at any point in the session, first thing to try is logging on and then back into the session, and that will usually fix most of the problems if you do have any. Okay, looks like most people are okay, so I'll lower all the hands now, and we can get going. Someone just mentioning about the beeps, that's people coming in and out of the session. Unfortunately, I can't control that, and it's just something that is inherent with this system, unfortunately. But as we get into the session, that should settle down. So a brief overview of where we're at this point. We had the announcement from the Secretary of State on the 6th of January that schools would be closed and that GCSEs and A-level exams wouldn't go ahead as planned in the summer. And then on the 13th of January, there were letters sent between DfE and Ofqual to basically say that there would be a process for alternative arrangements and agree that there would be a consultation on that for the exams in 2021. And then on the 15th of January, we had the consultations released on the alternative arrangements. There's one for vocational qualifications, and there is also the GCSE, AS and A-level consultation around how the grades should be awarded in the summer. Now, that consultation closes at 11:45 this evening. So if you haven't yet given any responses to the questions that are being asked there, I would certainly encourage everyone to do so. It can influence the decisions that are made around the arrangements for this summer. So there's a link there on that slide where you can go and look at the consultation and submit any responses as well. And then just the other week as well, we had a notice released to centres from JCQ. That was about NEA, and that set out that NEA, so performing, composing, recording, technology-based composition, could be completed outside of the centre, outside of the normal controls that we would normally have in place and the supervision there, if there's closures for centres, students isolating, or shielding as well. But work would still need to be authenticated as the student's own as well. So you would still have to be able to authenticate that. But that's the sort of latest position on all of that information. So what we do know at this point is that the exams won't be going ahead this summer as they normally would, and that there will be a grade that will be based on the teacher's assessment of the standard at which the student is performing. Now it's suggested that that will be as late in the year as possible as well. There's potential that there could be some internally marked papers to help inform the teacher grade as well, and that those papers could be provided by the exam boards. And then there's also a proposal that the exam boards could provide guidance and training and support for teachers and help with a standardized approach to the teacher grades as well. And then finally, the NEA should continue where possible as well. And through the JCQ notice that came, obviously this could be outside of the centre and outside of those normal controls and supervision. So a brief overview of the proposals are that students would continue with their education this academic year. Obviously, at the moment, that is all being done remotely as the centres remain shut. And that students would be assessed by their teachers in a period between May and early June. So that's the proposed sort of window for when the assessments would take place. And then teachers would submit the grades to exam boards by mid-June. There would then be a quality assurance process carried out by the exam boards throughout June. And then once the quality assurance process has taken place, it's proposed that results could be issued, and that would most likely be in early July. So that would be a fair bit earlier than results would normally be issued. But that would give students time for any appeals process, but also to manage the UCAS and progression from there onto the next stage of their education. And there is also a proposal that there is an appeals process for students, and that initially the first consideration would be by the school or the college. So there are still lots of things that need to be confirmed, and we won't get those really until the outcome of the consultation. As I said, that closes this evening, but there has been a huge response. I saw a post this morning from Ofqual saying that there's been around 90,000 responses to the consultation so far. So it will probably take a little bit of time before we get all of the outcomes from the consultation, and it does normally take a couple of weeks for outcomes to be published as well. So the things that are still to be confirmed is when teachers will actually make their final assessment. So it's proposed that it should be as late in the year as possible, and that's looking like May, June sort of period, but we'll need to wait for the confirmation around that. There's also questions around what evidence can be used by teachers to inform their final assessment grade. So there is the proposal that there could be some sort of tests or papers provided by exam boards, and that could be used to inform the final assessment grade, and it's not clear yet the role that NEA could take in informing those final assessment grades. Obviously, for music and music technology, that forms quite a significant part of the qualification, and is important to the grades that you will probably be considering for your students. So making that clear to any feedback that you're giving Ofqual in response to the consultation, that would be an important thing for music and music technology. Then there is also a proposal that there could be a choice of topics in any papers that are provided. Obviously, different centres are at very different stages, and even different students have different access during this time as well. And it may be the case that not all the content has been covered, and there will be differences in terms of the content covered by different centres as well. So there's a proposal that there could be this choice of topics in the questions that are on these papers as well. And as I mentioned, we're not sure yet what role NEA will play in the final assessment grade. And it's also proposed that the NEA is marked by the teachers, but we don't yet know if this will be moderated or not, and have to be submitted to exam boards, or if this will just be part of a process that will inform the final assessment grade as well. We also need to know the period that papers are to be taken, if this is something that happens. There's also questions around the conditions that the papers should be taken under, because obviously there may be cases where students aren't able to go into a centre when the papers are taken, and it's proposed that there's questions around whether this could be done outside of the centre, outside of any sort of controls and the normal controls that you would have maybe around taking these papers as well. Still asking for confirmation around what training, guidance, support exam boards can provide to teachers and centres in providing the final assessment grade as well. There's still to be confirmation around the quality assurance process and what that will look like, and the grounds for appeal and the process around that as well. And because we're probably getting this notice much earlier in the year, there are questions around what the options are for private candidates. I think in the summer of 2020, private candidates were probably in a position where the centres that they were entered through weren't in a position to provide a grade for them, because of the evidence that they held, or the lack of evidence that they had for that candidate, and so weren't in a position to provide a centre assessment grade for private candidates. I think with the situation this year, Ofqual looking to have a process in place where that is more available to private candidates, and so they can be provided with a grade and move forward with that. And the other thing to mention is that there is a question in the consultation about whether international centres will be able to offer the exam and NEA as normal. And obviously that can really depend on the situation in the various different countries as well. So there is a question around whether that exam boards would have that go ahead for international centres, if that's possible as well. And then really it's what can you do for now with your students. Obviously different centres are in different situations, and students have different access to resources and access to remote learning, and so it's a kind of, if this is possible, kind of approach with all of this. I would certainly recommend, if you can, to continue to deliver the content for any of the exam components. As it's been suggested, and the proposal is that there could be some form of paper that would help inform the teacher assessment grade, and therefore certainly continuing with the content around the exam components would be a really good idea, because that will just prepare your students for if these papers do take place. Obviously, it's also their learning, and it will help them with their skills and knowledge to progress onto their next stage of education, or wherever they are moving on to as well. It's also said that DfE have stated that teaching should continue where possible as well. So continuing any teaching that you can at this point is to be encouraged there. And now it's also suggested that students should continue with NEA where that's possible as well. The JCQ notice that came out obviously allows this to continue outside of the centre and outside of the normal supervised conditions. Obviously, with music and music technology, the access to resources and equipment is going to have a really big impact on that for students, and that may be a possible barrier and prevent that happening for some students. Obviously, there is a suggestion in the proposal that the NEA should continue where it's possible, but it's also said that if it's not possible for students, they shouldn't be disadvantaged if they are unable to continue and complete the NEA as well. So obviously, encourage access to free resources where that's possible, and if students can access those free resources, that's great. Or if they have the normal systems that you use in your centre as well. I'd also suggest using video conferencing as much as possible with this, because as it says, you need to authenticate the work still. So catching up with students on their progress, if they are working on NEA, through video conferencing can allow you to see what work they're doing, how it's progressing, and allow you a better knowledge of if that's the student own work as well. Has there been any suggestion for how grading may work if NEA is not included? Not yet. There's obviously, we've got to wait for the outcome of the consultation to confirm all of this stuff around grading. But it's, obviously there's lots of questions around that, and how much influence all of this stuff will have on the grade that you provide. And then just finally, there's some links to some free software that could possibly be used. Obviously, there's lots of other options out there, but just from my experience, I think MuseScore, if you're using Sibelius or something similar as your score writing package in your centre, then MuseScore is a good free alternative. It works across PC and Mac, and so that's a great way that could allow students to access score writing. If they've got work in Sibelius in a centre, that can be exported as a MIDI file, and MuseScore will accept the import of a MIDI file and should separate all the parts out for you as it would normally look as well. And then from a door perspective, again, works across PC and Mac. Studio One, which is Persona's product, not that I'm pushing any of these really. There's a good freeware version of that that's available as well. So that's another option there. But as I said, there's lots of other options out there, and also there are free versions or free trials that are being offered by lots of companies for the software that they provide as well. So that's something to possibly look at as well. So there's a link to the contact portal where you can submit any your queries and messages and things like that. There's also a link to the Pearson Music community page where I'll post a recording of this session as well as the slides. But what I'll do, I'll just see there's been some questions come in, so I'll go back and go through those as much as I can. So would it be possible to create a list of all free resources? I can have a look at doing that and see if, I mean, it might not be a complete list, but I can possibly provide a bit more of a detailed list there. Could Pearson provide PDFs and recordings of all set works to support remote teaching and learning? That's more tricky because of copyright agreements that are in place. So we don't own the rights to the works, the set works. We have an agreement with and a license to use them in the anthology and for exam purposes. And it's to provide them free and digitally. I don't think that's going to be possible purely from a rights perspective, because we would have to get an agreement from the rights holders, but also I think cost-wise, to be able to get an agreement to do that would be difficult as well. Assuming the board releases some papers, will the content range for each one and limited to a couple of AOs? Again, I can't answer that at this point. We do need to kind of wait for the consultation outcomes before we know what could possibly happen with the papers and what choices of topics or areas of study could be on there and what we can do with that. So it is a bit of a wait and see on that one there. Students who can continue their composition at home, but some who can't, I've had them all stop their composition for the time being. If they continue, anyone else in the same position? I have a colleague who would. Same question for music tech. Some are kit at home, but not all. Presumably, they all stop AEO work too. I mean, in response to that, there is obviously the suggestion in the consultation that NEA work should continue if it is possible, but also that if it's not possible, that students shouldn't be disadvantaged when you're coming up with the teacher assessment grade. So I think it's an individual decision of what you do with that sort of situation and how you would manage that. Also using GarageBand for composition, I do not have access to it at home. What would you suggest? I think in terms of that, with using GarageBand, it depends what they were using on GarageBand. If they were using just the sort of MIDI-based stuff, then it's possible to export the MIDI and use it in another system. If they're using audio, again, it's possible to mix out the audio and import that into another system as well. But then that may come down to what plugins they were using and things like that as well. But also remembering that it's only where possible that these sort of things could continue. MuseScore doesn't work on Chromebooks, true. Pupils by school. So Noteflight works easier. Yeah. So as I said, there are other options out there for different situations. So could we have access to the textbook via Active Learn like before? I need to find out what's happening with that. I think it is just the free sort of trials that are going on rather than the sort of set time period sort of access to the textbooks at this point. So I think from what I know, I don't think it's going down the sort of free access for a set time period. I think it is just the free trials that are available for those sorts of things. For IO, very good for notation-based work. Yep. So I'm trying to find free browser-based solutions for NEA. Yeah, so there are some sort of browser-based things, as suggested in some of these earlier posts as well. And obviously, you know, other people have done lots of stuff and posting links in here as well. So they're obviously very useful to help. Just having a look to see if there's any more particular questions coming in there. Are there? I just saw something and it's disappeared off my screen. Are there any additional courses on how to deliver the mix? One man teams, nothing to compare. I don't have any recommendations for that at the moment. Is it likely that the 2022 cohorts course rights will be altered? I think that's something that DfE and Ofqual will need to possibly look at in the future, but that's a decision that they will make. So obviously, I think at this point, the main focus is on summer 2021 and making sure that students can progress to the next stage of education and receive their qualifications there. So I think it's a wait and see with 2022 what may happen there. But am I right in assuming that we mark NEA mock comps out of 30? Total mark would then be 140 instead. Well, at this point, yeah, as you say, we don't know exactly yet, but if you do get NEA and it is considered, then it may be that it's internally marked and it may not go to moderation, but we'll again have to wait and see. The way that marks would have worked in the summer if it had all gone ahead as normal would have been that you would have marked performances and compositions for GCSE, this is out of 30, and then there would have been a scaling factor applied to those components to make the overall percentage and marks for the qualification to work out. So actually they would have ended up essentially being doubled to give them 60 marks in total. uh, okay. So someone asking if I'll do another session once the consultation results have been released. So yeah, so once we do know anything further, I'll be setting up some further sessions and probably go more subject specific with those as well, so we can sort of focus on what's happening with each qualification there as well. And saw something else. Okay, no. Do we use grade boundaries from 2 years ago when working out final grades? So in terms of the grade boundaries that you could use when looking at that, that's certainly something to look at. I can't remember what details are out there from the November series as well. I think they are online now as well. But I would be looking at grade boundaries from different years and seeing any trends as well to help inform that. And then yeah, so A-level set works, presume that we should continue teaching the works on the reduced list. Yes, but saying that, if there is evidence that could be considered, and this obviously depends on the outcome of the consultation as well, or what could be included, you may want to include the sort of knowledge of the students working on other things that may have included the set works that were removed, but obviously that does depend on the consultation outcome and what evidence can be used and included in informing that grade. So familiar with subversion, okay. Including Courtney Pine, someone's asked. Well, Courtney Pine was removed for the summer 2021 assessment, so that wouldn't include that one to continue with teaching for students that are completing this summer. Could the board do the grade boundary analysis for us and put in a document? I don't think that's something that we could provide. I think it, because I mean it will come down to centres deciding on what grades they go with, and as I said, the detail will come out of how you decide on that after the consultation, and what you can include as well. But I think it's there won't be any specific set grade boundaries to include and go through that. But I would be looking at the different grade boundaries over the years, looking at trends and how that could potentially change, and but also considering the grade distribution as well from the previous years and how that looks different in summer 2020 as well. Okay, someone has just joined by the look of it. So yeah, there are materials in the section to download, so that gives you all the slides. But as I said, there is a recording, so I've recorded this, and I'll make the recording available on the Pearson Music Community page, which is the bottom link on that slide that's on view there as well. So hopefully that answers all your questions. I know that there's still a lot that isn't decided yet, and I can't provide all those answers at this point, but I thought it was just a good idea to run a quick session just to give an update and give information of where we are at this point, and how things are moving, and when we can expect some more news. So hopefully you found this useful, and I hope you all have a good day and weekend. Uh, someone just asking about if we have a situation where international sit it and UK doesn't. That is something that will come out after the consultation, because that is a direct question in the consultation as well around that situation. So there will be feedback on that. Okay.